into the quantum mechanics?
Yes, I am a quantum mechanic. I am still on my Scottish travels and still in Jura. Obviously, I came up here for Stonewatch, but then I continued to have a look around at local legends, particularly hauntings, fairies, and something that I'm definitely going to revisit, because in this episode, you will see that I actually did find a local collector of paranormal tales, and very contemporary paranormal tales at that. And off mic, we got talking about the tradition of seer families here. And this is something that Peter had covered in a previous episode. This acceptance that there are people who have, it's not just a psychic ability, it's a natural sort of born and inherited ability to see things that other people can't see. They become a wise woman, a wise man. And I'm fascinated by that, and fascinated by the sheer acceptance of that as fact. It isn't really considered, I don't know, like a woo thing, as we might, as people might call it in England. But to get us into that interview, I really wanted this episode to focus on some of the weird and paranormality that happens around here, some of the ghost stories. In this show, sometimes we just like to sit back and enjoy a good story. And two of those people I really want to give a shout out to, Lauren and Nicholas, new Patreons this week. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/TQM pod. If you want to support us, that would be brilliant. Now, before we get into my interview with Ingi, I've been collecting stories around Jura and sort of going into, well, there's really only one pub, and finding people who could point me in the right direction. Now, this is something that I pulled out of old tome, but it's some work collected by John Gregerson Campbell in the late 1800s. And it tells the tale of what I think is one of the best little, I guess, haunted boat tales I've ever come across. On the southern Hebridean coast, just off Islay, there once lay a small fishing boat, tied up on the beach just below the chapel. At first glance, there was nothing strange about it. Oak-ribbed, sea-bitten, planks tarred black with pitch. But the villagers whispered of what came at night. For it is said, under a moonless sky, shadows would rise and take to the boat as if it were their own. 6 rowers, pale as driftwood, a helmsman cloaked in seaweed. No sound of speech, only the scrape of unseen oars in the sand. And the boat would rock, even when the sea lay still. A young man, Owen, son of a fisherman, once dared to watch from behind a dune, and he saw them. He swore the figures rowed without touching the water, and when he tried to speak of it, his throat closed tight. Not a soul would sail in that boat after that. No one would even untie her. The village let her rot. But she didn't rot. Years passed, new owners came, scoffing at island superstition. They took the boat to Islay. There, she was used to ferry the drowned ashore after a wreck. Some said she groaned when the dead were loaded. Not long after, 6 men, same number as the ghostly rowers, took her out on a clear morning. They never came back. The sea returned the boat upside down with all 6 life belts still tied to the seats. Some say that the boat belonged not to the living but to the lost. And that night, when the tide comes high and the moon is dark, if you look from the dunes of Iona or to the west shore of Jura, you might see 7 figures in a boat that leaves no wake. Now, I really like that, because I have been speaking to, well, very specifically yesterday, a commercial fisherman who confirmed that he had heard that story as a child. So I really rather like that. Another story, and my final one before we get into the interview, from Gregerson Campbell's accounts, is something that I think this is very, very Jura as a story. Because they say that Jura's hills are made of silence, and what breaks that silence should be heeded. In the valley between 2 of the paps, there is a glen the old people wouldn't name aloud. They just call it, in Gaelic, that place. One night, a man named Callum was riding home with his grey mare. The moon was high, the road was dry, and the whiskey was warm in his chest. But when they reached that glen, the animal stopped. stiff as stone, ears flat, hooves dug in. Callum cursed, kicked her sides, but the mare wouldn't budge. She was trembling. Then he heard it. Not wind, not water. A single footstep. And then another. But nothing was there. Suddenly the mare reared back, nearly throwing him. She bolted the other way, back to the house, foam flying from her mouth. The next morning they found that the bridge beyond the glen had collapsed in the night. Stones scattered, timbers snapped like twigs. If Callum had crossed as planned, he'd have fallen into the gorge and never been seen again. He sold the mare the next week, but some say the next rider she bore died in the sea. They say horses in Jura know what's waiting before we do. And if a good horse won't go forward, you'd better not go back. Now, that also is reminiscent of what I've been told around here. So there are stories that animals sometimes know better than humans, but the humans aren't too far behind. There's also, interestingly, I didn't realise this, but on Islay very particularly, you can sometimes feel very gentle earth tremors, and the animals apparently behave weirdly a day before that happens. That's something that we hear all around the world. That's not particularly paranormal or unusual, but it does add to this sense of weirdness and peculiarity. And as you would expect from a quantum mechanic, one of the things I did do yesterday on the solstice was go down to the boat house where the KLF burnt the £1 million and then burnt my own £1 million of fake notes. And there's something very peculiar about the atmosphere down there. It is very ethereal and strange. And that is a great segue to get into this wonderful conversation I had with Ingi. We will hear about her own very extraordinary paranormal experience on the island, some black dog tales, some fairy tales, and how to get rid of fairies the Gaelic way. I'll be back to say goodbye after this one, but enjoy the chat. Oh, and I should say, she'll definitely be coming back for a longer interview, as I said, about seers and fairies. Anyway, I'll see you after this chat. As you all know, particularly for your Patreons, I have come up north to the Hebridean islands of Islay and Jura. And the plan is basically for summer solstice, I will be at some standing stones in Jura, but unfortunately they don't go to the pub for a drink, but they may do other interesting things. We will find out, because today is Thursday and I'm going there tomorrow. In the meantime, I've been going around the island of Islay trying to find new and interesting stories to insert into this episode. First starting with the stones, but also this is such a magical and mystical place. There are so many things I want to tell you. And I was wondering how I was going to write them all down and relay them. And that was until I went into a bookshop in search of a local history book on hauntings and legends and lore. And I bumped into someone amazing who has got some amazing stories. I've said amazing twice, but they really are very good, that are all about the island. The first thing that I discovered was something called, well, we'll talk about it, the Toothstone. Ingi, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Great to meet you.
You were in the dining room of our Airbnb house, which is about 5 minutes down the road from where you live, I think, in Port Charlotte.
Yeah, it's not far at all. So, yeah, Bruichladdich.
Bruichladdich, right.
Bruichladdich,
I was waiting for you to say it because
yeah.
I am so terrible with the name. That is written down the side of the distillery, just down the road. Right, okay. Yeah. Every time I think I've got it right, and I ask Google, and Google doesn't get it right.
No, it
sometimes. So Bruichladdich. And the first thing that I said to you was, I am looking for stories about stones. And you said, well, you want to go to the Toothache Stone. So that evening, I tried to find the Toothache Stone, but you sent me a photograph of it. Tell me about the Toothache Stone. What is the legend? Where is it?
So the Toothache Stone is in a glen up the back of Port Charlotte called Glenmore, which literally just means big glen. It's really descriptive and imaginative. But it's about a mile up there and it's right down next to the river at the bottom of that glen. And yeah, basically there's an old folk tale that apparently if you have toothache and you go down to this stone and you hammer a nail into it, it will magically disappear.
And this stone, it sort of looks like a molar, right?
It does kind of look like a molar, yeah.
And it's about the same size as, well, I would say like a large dog is probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah, probably like, a Great Dane.
A Great Dane, yeah.
We're using scale here, yeah.
It's not absolutely enormous. Now, do we know, was it actually put there on purpose or does it just appear there?
No, it's just kind of been there since, well, I guess the last big geological event, and gained this reputation as being this wonderful healing stone for toothache.
Right, okay. And that is presumably because of its similarity to human
I shall
teeth.
assume so, yes.
Yeah, right.
I shall assume so.
Because when you get up to it, and you sent me some close pictures, I couldn't work out how to get down to it, so I was quite worried about walking across somebody's land.
I was going to say, well, you don't really need to worry here, but yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's full of rusty old nails.
Yeah, it is.
So how long have people been doing this?
As far as I know, at least a couple 100 years.
Wow, okay.
Timings are vague. There's not really a set point that, it was initiated as being the magical tooth stone.
Right.
But there's kind of writings that go back to the Victorian times about it that I've found.
And is there any evidence that it ever worked? Or is it just a placebo?
Well, you know what? I had really bad wisdom toothache and I missed my opportunity. And I'm gutted about that. I only remembered when I was actually down there the other day, I thought, God damn it, could have saved myself money on the dentist if I'd just gone down and hammered a nail in.
Well, Peter and I have both had issues with teeth recently. And in fact, my partner went into the shed here and found an old nail to put in there. So maybe I will do that before I leave. But the thing that I also took away, so quite often you get these little history books, and I did buy one from the shop you work in.
Yeah.
Tales of Islay, Fact and Folklore. And there are some good tales in there, but they tend to be light on the really interesting, juicy stuff. And whilst we were talking, you said that you were working on a project about this very thing now.
Yeah. So I started this project a couple of years back, basically collecting ghost stories.
Right, okay.
I think it's that common thing that everybody everywhere in the world really enjoys a ghost story.
Yes,
and
very much
why
so.
not? So I got interested in it. I'd started speaking to some of the older Ilachs, as we call them, so old Islay people in the village. And I started collecting quite a volume of areas and properties and sort of old grounds where things had happened that people had had apparitions in, or they'd felt presences, or they were just straight up like, nope, don't go there, don't touch that, stay out the way of there. And me being completely curious, it just fed into that. And I started this little side project. Life got in the way a bit, and I kind of just ended up working and doing all these mundane adult things. But recently, I just had this kind of, this spark to start it up again. And actually, a bit of that came from, I had a bit of a strange experience just over a year ago, and instead of being spooked out by it, I was incredibly frustrated. I couldn't make sense of it. And when I found out that more people had had similar experiences around about the same area, I thought, I'm going to start mapping this down and see where there's crossovers, and just make a bit of a project out of it.
Because the thing is, these are contemporary accounts rather than looking back in history. These are living people who have seen something recently or experienced something recently.
Yeah, that was my kind of idea. I mean, as much as you need to look into the past to look into the future, as you say, I felt like there was so many old stories that kind of everybody had heard, and maybe they were tainting people's experiences, or someone down the pub would say something and you think, yeah, okay, like Great Uncle Dougal saw that in 1970, but did you? So I started asking people who were alive and well about their experiences, and just kind of keeping note on them, and also looking a bit more into the folklore surrounding the landscape, and also a bit of the history.
So what was your origin story for this? What happened to you?
Oh, so it's quite a long story. But basically, I don't want to sound daft. I experienced an apparition. And I think what cemented it for me was I wasn't alone. I was with someone else who experienced the same thing at the same time.
Wow.
Which is really unusual, I know, in a lot of cases. And again, like I said, it just really frustrated me because I wanted to make sense of this. I'm like a rational person and I like to have an answer for everything, but I just didn't.
So what was it an apparition of?
So, oh goodness, do you want the long story or the short story?
Well, we've got quite a lot to pack in. Go on, give me the short version.
So basically, I went out with someone on a drive one night and we ended up, for a laugh, more or less, going ghost hunting. That sounds very stereotypical, but the thing was, it was a guy who latterly I did end up dating, and I just assumed he was trying to impress me, you know, being all macho, like, yeah, we'll go look for ghosts. But I knew he was like shit scared. And we went down to this kirkyard and this old chapel on Islay called Kildalton, which is sort of famous, that area, not specifically that churchyard and the old chapel and the crosses down there, for being quite eerie, and it's had quite a few sightings. It wasn't that... Oh,
That was as if that was
like
that sounded like a door behind us. Yeah, I think that is just the creakiness of this building. Yeah, or it's a spirit. Yeah.
Doesn't want me to tell anything.
But I was that area. Like other people have said that to me. The Kildalton. I found a story. There's a story there where there's a church with a stone font that never dries. That was the story I got from there.
So Kildalton is famous for a cross. There's Kildalton Cross, and there's a chapel in the grounds. And like, it's ancient. The cross comes from the 8th century, and the last service that was ever held in that chapel was in 1689. So it's not been used in a very long time. It's got some amazing carvings on that cross, and it's quite intimidating. I would say even the most sceptical person in the world would probably say there's something a bit odd about that patch of land.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, back to my story. We headed down that way and I thought, oh, he wants to look at, there's a big abandoned castle not far from there.
You're in the car?
Yes, we are.
Okay, yeah.
And like, we didn't go there, we just went to this kirkyard. And I remember it was dark, it was springtime, we got out the car and my master plan was, I'm going to go up behind him and say boo and scare the shit out of him, and he's going to give up and it'll be a laugh. But no, we decided, we went into the grounds, you go for this big old iron gate, that's really building a scene. And we walked into this kirkyard and there's the big Kildalton cross on one side and it's about 2 meters tall. It's really imposing. And I remember thinking at this point, like, I'm not feeling scared, but you know, this is a bit out of odds. And we just edged further into this kirkyard, and I remember looking over at the old chapel, which is 2 stories high. It's completely abandoned, like I said, it's not got a roof on it or anything. And I looked up at this window on the left-hand side, and oh my goodness, I'm getting shivers. I basically saw this man dressed in like, I don't know how to describe it, but probably like medieval, kind of a long shirt kind of thing that they wore, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like a smock.
Yes, that's the word. And paid absolutely no heed to me, but just walked past the window. And I thought, that's impossible. That's on what should be the 2nd story, and there's nobody else here.
And was he glowing, or how did you see the light?
He was kind of glowy, I guess. There's a kind of slight luminous about him. But it was that sort of faint, I wouldn't say he was like transparent, but he wasn't, you know, opaque like you and I.
Yeah, right.
And I remember thinking, nope, I'm just like, you know, my mind's playing tricks on me. But that's weird, that's never happened to me before. And I looked over to the guy beside me and he was pretty much completely white at this point. And I thought, nah, he's just, you know, it's just, I was dishing it off. But we stood there a bit longer and I remember looking through the doorway into this chapel and the same figure again just walked past over out of view of the doorway as if he was heading into a corner at the far side. And I just remember thinking, like, what the hell's going on? I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't had loads of caffeine before I'd gone out. Like, I felt completely well. Nothing was out of sorts with me. You know, I was pinching myself. I was like, this is all real.
Yeah.
And the guy I was with as well had been looking in the same direction, and I can only assume that he had seen the same thing at the same time. Anyway, we continued through this kirkyard, and there's this kind of set of graves, and I imagine that they probably belong to some kind of laird or something, because they were behind a fence. And I just remember feeling this very unpleasant, sort of oppressive presence. And at that point, looking over to the guy beside me, and we both just said, I think we should leave.
So you had a conversation, and he confirmed he had seen it?
So we went, and both of us were a bit freaked out at this point. We walked backwards out of the kirkyard because I was like, I'm not turning my back. I don't know what's happened, but that's it. We got out, closed the gate, and we went into his car, and I kind of looked over at him and I said, did you, and he was like, yeah. And I said, right, 3, 2, 1, we're both going to say the same thing, like what we saw.
Yeah.
So counted down from 3, and we both repeated the exact same sighting to each other.
My goodness.
Like, it's been instantaneously.
Yeah.
And at that point, we just were like, right, let's get out of here. But it didn't scare me, because I feel like whatever that was I saw literally wasn't paying any attention to me. It was completely oblivious. But it really annoyed me because I couldn't find this kind of answer to what I'd seen. And there's been apparitions around that area, but not in that specific site. And actually, it's been an old gamekeeper from an estate that people have seen just about 2 miles down the road, which didn't bear any resemblance to what we saw that night.
So you couldn't find anybody else that had seen the same thing at the same place?
Not at the moment, no.
And did it feel... So it paid no heed to you?
Yeah.
So that feels like it was stone tape rather than perhaps a conscious apparition?
Yeah, it definitely seemed like a sort of stone tape situation.
So that inspired you. I mean, that... You don't get that out of your head quickly. That is something that stays with you.
No, I guess it haunts you, excuse the pun, in a sense.
Yeah,
but I didn't feel, I wasn't overly bothered by it. I don't know how to say it. I was just really annoyed that I couldn't make sense of it.
Right.
I don't really have a fear of these things at all, more just a curiosity.
Yeah.
But it was just that overwhelming, why did I see that, and why did he see that at the same time?
Yeah.
We have this shared experience. That's completely bonkers. That doesn't happen very often.
So you were then compelled to go and find other people with contemporary stories.
Yeah, I was, because I felt like, history's clearly not dead.
No, of course, absolutely, yeah.
And the more people that I started asking, do you have a story? Or you'd get chatting about things, just workplaces or people you'd meet. I worked in a distillery for a bit, so we were quite close, a lot of us in different departments. And the amount of people... completely, who you'd never suspect, who had some kind of story, and especially apparitions, which is major,
Mm-hmm.
Usually people have a story about something going missing in the house or feeling a presence, but no, it was full on.
So what sort of things? What can you tell me a story that you uncovered?
Yeah, gosh, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. There's been a lot.
Are there any that really scream, that's so Islay?
That's so Islay. I would say probably the most common one I'd heard again was down that side of the island at Kildalton, and it was the gamekeeper story.
Right, okay.
Numerous sightings of him in different places. So that castle down there was owned by a guy who was like an explorer, and he had a gamekeeper, or at least a worker who's high up in the estate, who had what we would call a familiar. So this man would go away quite often to work on other estates, but people reported seeing him in the woodland around there, even though it wasn't him. So he kind of had this duplicate.
A doppelganger?
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Which seems completely out there, but
so
yeah.
does that mean that he was in some way paranormal, or it was did he cause it, or was it happening to him? Do you know?
Well, we don't know. There's there's no indication that he was, saying that, oh, I'm a doppelganger or anything like that. But there was just people were seeing a familiar, as we call it, of the man whilst he was in a different location. And then when he died, these sightings continued. It was as though this kind of copy of himself never really went away.
Right.
And even like as recently as I had an account from a guy, well, actually it was his daughter, and the man had worked as a postman for a couple of years on Islay. And he said he would be going up to the castle when there were still people living in it, and he'd seen this guy, even though it was years after he died.
Wow. And so it became a feature. People would sort of almost blasé say, oh, I saw the gamekeeper.
Yeah. I mean, nobody really wanted to see it. I feel like a lot of people aren't so open about these things and would rightfully be quite terrified.
Yeah.
But yeah, numerous dog walkers and, again, the postman. And just other members of the public. And people who weren't familiar with the story either, people would just be like, oh, I saw this guy in the woods, it was a bit weird, and he just sort of disappeared, right. So in terms of other people, did you uncover people who, because you say everyone's got a story, did this make people step forward and say, actually, my house has a thing about it? So the most interesting one that I spoke to was it was an older guy in my village who works as like a tradesman. So he does all sorts of things. I think he's trained as a joiner. And I remember I got a lift with him once. I was moving some furniture from a house clearance, funnily enough, at the other end of the island, and he offered to help me out. And we got talking about it, and there was numerous properties on the island where he had experienced things and places where he straight up wouldn't work. And I thought, okay, that's quite quirky. Kept a record of kind of what he'd said, and I'd spoke to other people who were like, yeah, no, that place, not working there. Similar events happening. There was I think it was a farm down somewhere called Ellister, and I can't remember if it was Easter or Wester, but a lot of people who had worked in the rafters of that building had experiences of just feeling this like really oppressive energy, or things going missing, things going wrong, injuring themselves and whatnot, and we're just like, nope, not doing it.
So what sort of things were they seeing? So this guy who was refused to work in certain places, not so much apparitions, you say, so that's much rarer, but like were things moving? Were there noises?
As far as I know, things were moving, and it was that overwhelming feeling of dread that people kind of seem to experience with kind of entities and whatnot. There was another property that I actually worked in for a while, and it was owned by a distillery, and they housed staff in it and visitors when they were over working and whatnot. And there was numerous stories from different employees about things moving or hearing things in the middle of the night. There was one employee who's rather high up who had an apparition of a woman standing at the end of his bed.
Why is it always the bedroom?
I know, it's the worst place.
Why is it not at the end of the dining room table? Because then at least you've got a chance to avoid it. Just don't come into the bedroom.
Yeah. And it was like things turning themselves on and off, hearing things in the night, and that guy's whole apparition of seeing that woman. There was other people who'd also reported sort of having really wacky dreams and whatnot.
Oh.
And it turns out there's a bit of a story about that building being cursed.
Who cursed it?
Apparently it was a gypsy woman who was staying over, and the owner of, it was a hotel at the time, had refused her a night's accommodation, and in a fit of rage she cursed the building. That's the legend. How accurate that is, I don't know. But it's had a bit of a knack for the owners of that building dying very suddenly.
Goodness. So the that part of the island as well, one of my notes here says that there was a couple that reported seeing a black shuck down there in the wood, and those sometimes do go with curses, don't they? The black shark dogs.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder whether they were seeing like an expression of that curse.
Yeah. So there's the black dog of Lagavulin.
That's a known thing, is it?
Yeah, that's
right.
a known entity. Yeah. So that's kind of like our local cryptid on Islay, I guess.
Right. Okay. I love a cryptid.
We love a cryptid. There's the black dog of Lagavulin, which dwells down that little area. You'll have noticed when you're down there's a lot of little passes.
Yes.
It's quite rocky. It's quite I don't know how to describe.
Well, the foliage is, as opposed to other parts of the island, it's there's a lot of it, and it grows higher.
Yeah.
So as you're driving along, you feel more enclosed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this dog, it's not quite as far as there. It's slightly before. So the Free Distilleries path where you were, you would have gone past. There's some kind of open fields. It's really rocky. So that area, it's got all these little passes, and there's one of them which is known as Pass of the Dead, which,
Oh, wow.
The Gaelic landscape has its like little wonderful name for things, and it comes from, it used to be apparently where funerals, like processions, would have gone through.
Right.
Historically. But this black dog of Lagavulin, it's apparently about the size of a calf, and people have spotted it in that area, just kind of milling about. And there's never been any explanation for it, and it's been going on, far longer than your standard dog's lifetime.
And the calves up here, they're big calves. I mean, the breeds up here
are, yeah.
are big animals. So does anything bad happen to people that see them? Because obviously the English folklore is that it's a portent of death.
Yeah, so that's what really interested me. No, seems to just be you're
It's just a
unfortunate
vision.
and you just see this horrendous big dog knocking about the place. But yeah, no, it seems to be very passive.
That's at least is good.
Yeah, nobody's been reportedly eaten or attacked by it, so we just got a passive big cryptid knocking about the place.
But the thing about this area is this island. It's like all of the sort of spooky and strange things about England all compressed into one, because England as a territory, as opposed to like Wales is obviously quite rich, Scotland's very rich, but you have to travel a long way around here.
Yes.
Not only do you see lots of megaliths and abandoned and derelict places, but there are lots of little stories. So one of the things that I noticed as I was driving down there, I found what's it called, the Fairy Hill House.
Yes, Fairy Hills. Yeah, yes. We've got loads on the island. Yeah,
and so everybody that listens to this show will know how obsessed I am with fairies, and sometimes they do good things, sometimes they do bad things. Yes. I know there's a legend about a changeling. We'll come on to that. But how many? What is the relationship between fairies and the humans on the island?
Okay, so on Islay, there's, I think in most of the Hebrides as well. So we call them the Shi. So it's spelled SIDH. And anytime you look at a map and you see anything that kind of contains SIDH, it refers to the fairies. So if you saw like Crochshi, it means like hillock of the fairies. And there's quite a lot of them around in Islay. In fact, I've actually got some maps with me that I've circled all the fairy hills on.
Amazing. Amazing.
I was obsessed with them. So yeah, the fairies here, they were kind of considered, they could be sort of malefic and they could be benefic, It depended on how you approached them. If you sort of approach the fairies with a very neutral, sort of amicable term, then they're not going to bother you. But for example, if you disturbed a fairy hill, then, all hellfire to you, your life's going to get a lot worse. And in the same way, you might be really lucky and have fairies who are helping you out. There's kind of reports of them helping people out of household things. You've probably heard of like brownies and whatnot.
Yes.
Yeah, but the general sort of, I guess, the custom around it is that you don't thank them because that's seen as belittling them. So a fairy could do things for you or a spirit could do things for you, but you must never thank it for what it's done because it's seen as offensive.
Right, because it's yes, he's doing it for its own free will, and if he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't do it. I see what you're saying.
Basically, yeah. There is a slight twist in it on Islay that they did believe that the fairies would take milk. So you could offer milk to the fairies or the she, and they would take it, but they would not take, there's an example of an old woman who used to make clothes for them, and they were so offended they completely abandoned her.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. Because the milk thing, that comes up. We did an episode last year when we were talking about boggarts and boggarts living on farms and sometimes spoiling the milk just for the hell of it.
Because they used to say that if the cows ran dry, it was the fairies stealing the milk. And there was a custom, there's records of it, where they would actually put tar on the cow's ears, specifically on the 13th of May. That's a date that comes up continuously in like old tales of Islay, the 13th of May.
What would the tar do?
I have no idea. It was just
I see.
literally, there's no...
I know all for all the fairies. Tar on the cow's ears. Fine.
Yeah, specifically. A lot of the time people talk about iron and steel and things like that as being sort of repulsive to the fae, but it seems to be tar, and there's no given reason. I kept trying to find out why,
it's like a repulsive...
It's sort of this whole thing that, supposedly. I just think poor cows, they just...
Yeah. Got tar on their ears.
Yeah.
So we were also talking because one of the things that seems to be common in alien abductions and sort of fairy encounters is missing time.
Yes.
But also, so in English fairy lore, I was saying to you that one of the things you can do to get unglamorized is to quickly turn your clothes inside out. And then people have found that they come back to reality. So there are some great stories about people who realise something isn't right, turn their clothes back inside out, and suddenly, the cake that they had in their pocket is just leaves, that sort of thing. But in relation to here, you were telling me very quickly, the changeling story that's famous around here, they have a remarkable way of getting out of the glamorization. So the story is there's a blacksmith, am I right?
Yeah, there's a blacksmith by name of McKechran.
Yeah.
And he lived up by Kilhoman, up the northwest of the island. And he had a son who was 14 years old and suddenly took very poorly, basically bedbound. And it was completely unlike him. He'd just been a healthy young man. But this suddenly happened. And obviously the blacksmith was like distraught. His son's gone from being healthy to being completely sort of invalid. So he approached a wise man, and the man said it might be the cause might be a changeling. They've taken your son and it's a fairy in place of him, and I'll tell you what you have to do. So the man's like desperate to get his son back, of course. So he's like, okay, tell me what I have to do. And the story goes that he was given a big bucket of water, and he was told to take a pile of eggshells, dot them around in a circle in the room, and fill each eggshell from, one eggshell to the next with water from this bucket. And he thinks, okay, this is bizarre, but he's desperate, so he tries it. And the boy in the bed turns round watching him and says, oh my goodness, in my 800 years of being alive, I've never seen something so ridiculous. And he was instructed after that, if there was any strange remark from the boy, to throw him straight into a fire.
Oh.
So, yes. So the blacksmith picks up his son, but probably now assumed a changeling, and threw him into the fire. And luckily enough, it was a changeling. It wasn't his son. So after that, when it was established it was a changeling, he had to go down to the fairy hill on a specific date. So apparently it was Samhain. It's kind of debated, but that would make sense. And at these times of year, the fairy hills were said to open up, and you could see inside, and you could see the wee folk dancing and singing and whatnot. So he had to go down there, and he had to take with him a small kind of dagger. I've forgotten the name, it's completely gone from me. But anyway, and he had to go with a Bible as well to protect himself. So he went down, he had to stick the dagger in the threshold of the hill, enter it with a Bible, and find his son. And when he went inside, the fairies were all dancing around. It was all pretty manic, but he did find his son. He managed to pull him out of there, escape, and he pulled his dagger out of the ground and got his son back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he basically fights for him to come back. So the question we always had with changelings is, did they not notice that son was like 17 times the size of the fairies?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about that. I mean, there's no record of him having shrunk.
No, exactly. No, so that it never seems to be part of the lore. The people don't sort of go small and big. But then that's always explained by, well, that's the glamorization.
Yeah.
You see things that aren't necessarily there.
Yeah.
That is a brilliant story. Are there any other burning stories you have to tell me before you go?
Not particularly. I mean, I have so many.
Well, would you, rather than rushing through them here, would you come back on the show if we do a remote record?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We'll do a follow-up. That would be brilliant.
Absolutely love to do that.
And in the meantime, so we're going to be going to Jura for the solstice. Is there anything solstice-wise that people would be doing traditionally on Islay?
Oh, goodness. So, yeah, of course. There's no specific customs that I could find other than there is standing stones and whatnot, which do align. Yeah. It's kind of like, I feel that's so cliche with the,
No, but that's what a lot of those those monoliths, they appear to align. Some of them even appear to align with the paps on Jura as well, which would make sense.
Yeah, this end of the island and the west end of the island, there's a hill called Ben Tarteville, which was considered quite sacred, and there's a lot of old Mesolithic kind of tombs and stone circles and big stones all line up with this mountain. Well, it's not really a mountain, it's kind of a hill, but it's pretty flat around here, you get what I mean. So yeah, but there's no specific lore that I could find, which is annoying because I do love a good pagan festival.
Yeah, totally. Sort of so you don't have any stones that wander off for a dram at midnight?
No. Not that I know of. Although I'm sure maybe if I ask enough people I might find one.
Yeah. Well, Ingi, thank you so much for joining us. We will definitely speak to you again.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to Ingi for that interview, and I'm very grateful for the hospitality that myself and my partner have experienced all across Islay and Jura. It really is the most extraordinary of places. And if you were in any way interested in the paranormal, this is a place just to hang out. It's not spooky. It is, there's an atmosphere. Everywhere you go on both islands, you will find a standing stone. Now, not all of them are paranormal. In fact, hardly any of them are. They're usually way markers because this whole island was inhabited by many, many different people throughout the years. And there are often churches built nearby them because it represents either a high point mark or a pop point on road crossing, something like that. It's a reason for a building or a particular gathering point to exist there. But sometimes they aren't that. And as you heard there's the wonderful superstition of the tooth stone. I have been learning yesterday about the premonition stone, where if you lie on it, you see your future. There's all kinds of little things like this. There's every twist and turn. There's another peculiarity that just keeps you guessing about why, what, and how this place is. Anyway, I will leave you with that, and I will see you next time on the Quantum Mechanics.
Are you the Quantum Mechanics?